Jon Favreau's Iron Man 2 was a critical failure at the time of its release in 2010. Many critics and fans felt that it was a step down from the previous installment, 2008's Iron Man. The constant complaint that's still talked about today is the overcrowded story. I haven't revisited this movie since watching it multiple times in the theaters. After rewatching it, I can agree with the criticisms. I still think that the cast all put in good performances that would remain consistent throughout their times in the MCU. I just think that some of the direction for certain characters could have been given more effort. In this video, I will be going over the backstory, influences, the story, characters, and themes of 2010's Iron Man 2. With the success of 2008's Iron Man, a sequel was quickly put into production. The pressure of living up to the first movie and some behind-the-scenes issues definitely hurt this film. The first movie had about 3 years to develop, while the sequel had only less than 2. Favreau had plans for a sequel during the development of an Iron Man trilogy, but the first movie was changed to the extent that he had to improvise with the sequel story. The director of the first Iron Man movie, Jon Favreau, returned to direct and star as Tony's bodyguard, Happy Hogan. During the pre-production of the first Iron Man film, Favreau and the creative team had different plans for the first and second movie. Favreau had wanted the Mandarin and his Ten Rings organization to be the direct villain of the first movie instead of Obadiah Stane, though Stane would still be in the first movie, but strictly as Tony's mentor and friend. Then, in the sequel, it would be revealed that he was the mastermind behind Tony's abduction, similar to the scene of his betrayal in the 2008 movie. Then Tony would presumably have to face the loss of trust throughout the rest of the film. Over the course of development, and with some major studio interference, Stane became the movie's main villain, and the Mandarin wouldn't be used until 2013's divisive Iron Man 3. I think that if the studio had allowed for Favreau to execute his original plan, then it would have been easier for the creative team to turn over a sequel as quickly as the studio wanted. During the actual development of the sequel after Iron Man's release, Favreau took inspiration from the comics. Major influences for Iron Man 2's story comes from 1979's Demon in a Bottle and 1987's Armor Wars, both done by David Michelinie and Bob Layton. The Demon in a Bottle storyline had Hammer involved in the creation and deployment of several of Iron Man's villains in order to torment the hero and his corporate rival. The crucial aspect of the Demon in a Bottle storyline that Favreau and Downey were so eager to adapt was the journey that Tony went on in the later issues of the storyline. Over the course of the story, Tony becomes dependent on alcohol in order to cope with Hammer's attacks against him. He becomes self-destructive and pursues away his close friends. Tony goes on a very human journey of hitting rock bottom and then finally beginning to get onto the path to recovery. Alcohol doesn't really play a crucial role in the movie. The reasoning behind his erratic behavior throughout the movie is that he's slowly dying. I don't think that the struggle that Tony went through in the movie matches the scale of his struggles in the storyline. 1987's Armor Wars was the story where Tony became worried for the security of his technology and armor, anxious that his creations would be used for malicious purposes and worried that history would just repeat itself. So he sets out on repossessing all armors that reference his own. The movie sees how Tony reacts to the reproduction of his arc reactor. Tony and the world again see what his creations are capable of in the wrong hands. This is what brings in the government, who want to control the armor. I feel that the movie opens strongly with this concept, but then it just kind of fades away underneath all the other plot threads and themes. The movie opens up with the ending of the first Iron Man film, but from the perspective of this film's antagonist, Ivan Vanko. Vanko's father dies as Tony reveals his secret identity on the television. Vanko then discovers the plans for the arc reactor that his father never showed him. I don't understand why his father, who was a scientist, never showed his son, who's also a scientist, this major discovery. It makes it worse because Vanko simply recreates an arc reactor in the basement of their own home, showing that he could have done this at any time. After creating his own arc reactor, Vanko just kind of vanishes from the story until we need to check up on him just to show how he gets to a place. He only has like 2 fights with Tony, one in the middle and the final fight, with Tony believing that he was dead for the second half of the movie, not allowing for that character to have any more presence in Tony's story. I like how the first few scenes with Tony shows how the world has reacted to the presence of Iron Man in the last 6 months. Tony has just blended into his identity as Iron Man, using it to his advantage and to build up his own ego. He's reopening the Stark Expo, an obvious homage to Epcot. The expo is meant to represent Tony and his father's quest to leave behind a worthy legacy. The movie is obvious about this theme as Tony delivers a speech about it in the very beginning. The problem is that the theme of legacy then takes a backseat to responsibility, though I don't think the two themes are mutually exclusive. The government, of course, wants control over the Iron Man armor. They feel Tony is irresponsible and that it's in the best interest of the national security that the government have access to this advanced technology. We are seeing the world's reaction to this new power on a bureaucratic and military level. Iron Man is single-handedly making a new arms race. This raises the fears of the government and the people, though we don't really see the perspective of the people that much. This is the scene when we're reintroduced to Tony's love interest, Pepper Potts, and best friend, James Rhodes. We're also introduced to the film's secondary antagonist, Justin Hammer. The government uses Hammer and tries to manipulate Rhodes into trying to tear down the people's trust in Tony. I like how they still adapted the McCarthyism that was found in the Armor Wars storyline. Iron Man is a perfect character to explore this theme in the movie. I appreciate that they did dedicate some time to this concept, but unfortunately it doesn't really come back in the same way that it did at this point. I feel that the themes of legacy and responsibility could have gone really well together. Tony could have developed an overly cautious responsibility towards his legacy as the story moves on, making him vulnerable towards Fury's proposition to join the Avengers. Instead, we're introduced to my least favorite plot thread. Tony's arc reactor in his chest has a palladium core that's slowly poisoning him. I can see what they were trying to do. The grim specter of death hovering over Tony causes him to live recklessly, like there's no tomorrow. This is what damages his relationships with Pepper and Rhodes. I just think that it subtracts from the theme of legacy, especially when he just praised the need to build a proper legacy in the very beginning of the movie, and then he just fucks off and knowingly spoils it. Vanko finds and attacks Tony. He loses, but Tony and the government and the people just witnessed the damage of his tech in the wrong hands. Hammer sees an ally in Vanko and secretly employs him to develop armor that will rival Tony's. Hammer mentions to Vanko that they need to destroy Tony's legacy, but the only thing they do is target the expo. That would work, but Tony was already doing all the damage to his legacy himself. The antagonists of the movie aren't even involved in the decline of the character. They kind of do a good job at establishing that Tony is affected by Venko and his uses of his technology, and learning the truth about his own father, which is absolved way too quickly. But none of that goes much further than this scene of Tony confronting Venko in the prison. I feel that that should have been the motive behind his decline. The pressures of his father's legacy, the responsibility of learning what he wants to be remembered as, a warmonger or as a hero. The toxicity plot thread is literally just to get to the point of Tony discovering a new element. Venko betrays Hammer and fulfills his plans for revenge. Rhodes and Paper basically forgive Tony for his actions, seeing that he can be better. After the massive final fight, Tony learns responsibility, I guess. I think this is definitely one of the weaker stories from the MCU. It's disappointing because their inspirations are so perfect for adaptation. I just wish they chose one and got the proper time and support to develop it. I like the cast of this movie for the most part. There is just something very chaotic in all the performances that make it believable. People talking and shouting over each other. They don't pull any punches. And the dialogue isn't sappy, it's pretty realistic. I think just the cast had an energy that was fun to watch. RDJ never misses for me, but I found the character to be very annoying. He was just so erratic. The script didn't know what to do with him, so they just kept him on a downward spiral. His behavior was inconsistent and felt like it was just trying to fill time and get to the next plot point. I was hopeful in the beginning. He delivered his speech about honoring and establishing a worthy legacy for the future. He made Pepper the CEO of Stark Industries, showing that he was grown enough to recognize that he doesn't and never really cared about the business side of things. He was focusing on building a legacy as Iron Man. Stark Industries belonged to his father. He needs to make a name for himself. He makes a stand against the involvement of the government in his private affairs, a libertarian approach to defending his intellectual property, only trusting himself with his own technology, the basis of a good arc, realizing later along his journey that he needs the help of others to keep him grounded. There was just too much going on in the story, so his character suffered from getting pulled back and forth between storylines. My favorite moment from the character is his relationship with his father and with Pepper. I think they should have made his arc the pressure of first trying to live up to his father's legacy, then learning to make his own. Instead of making him fold under the pressure of his technology, getting into the wrong hands, disappointing his close friends and his father, dying from his arc reactor, it was all just too much. And the moment with Pepper on the plane after the Venko attack reminded me why I really liked this character. It was a human moment for him, where he was scared and didn't have a plan of what to do next. And then Pepper was there to kind of ground him. He's scared, but she can't run away from her problems, and neither should he. Their relationship also kind of takes a plunge. She was there for him in the beginning, but I like how she does punish him for crossing the line with her. He's being selfless and irresponsible. I just think that she should have given him a second chance, but maybe that fits the character. She's just kind of tired of his shit. I feel that Don Cheadle's James Rhodes is better than Terrence Howard's. I just feel like he had more to do in this movie, and he pushed forward one of the storylines. He and Pepper are the voices of reason in Tony's life. Tony forces him to make a decision regarding his own loyalties between his country and his best friend, though it's made easy because Tony is being an ass. He and the storyline of the political ramifications of Iron Man's presence kind of sizzles away after he acquires one of Tony's suits. The government now has an Iron Man suit, and all they do with it is just glue a bunch of guns onto it. What a surprise. It's a disappointing conclusion to an interesting storyline. I feel like Favreau didn't really know what to do with the character of Black Widow. I can understand if she reflects the targets and what they want. When she's with Tony, he's a creep, so she kind of acts flirtatious. When she's with Pepper, who's more collected and coordinated, she just doesn't have much to do in the movie besides that cool hallway fight scene in the end. Her character doesn't have much to her either. I feel that comes down to poor direction. She doesn't really have a presence, which, I guess Favreau might have thought that she's a spy, so she's meant to blend in, but that still could have been more interesting than what we actually got. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury really just show up just for plot convenience. I love seeing Sammy J on screen, but he was only there for the temporary cure of Tony's illness and give him his new storyline of finding a new element that can power his arc reactor. I think the inclusion of S.H.I.E.L.D. and actually having Fury appear in the movie does help build the larger universe. I really liked Sam Rockwell's performance and the movie's new interpretation of Justin Hammer. It was enjoyable to watch, and he felt like a guy who was on edge and who has something to prove. He's motivated by greed and ego, but there's not much beyond any of that. I kinda like how Mickey Rourke's Whiplash feels like an actual threat. The performance does edge on feeling like a Schumacher villain. I think it's the accent and the grill. But he's snapping necks, he's smashing heads. He's a more interesting opposite to Tony, someone violently driven by their genius. He's what the government has been fearing since Iron Man's arrival. He's the reminder that Howard was not a good man, and he should have been what tears down Tony as a character. The problem is that he shows up once and then Tony thinks he's dead until the final fight. Vanko and Hammer should have been tormenting Tony along the movie. They almost never interact with him. It makes the characters feel detached. For being the third movie in the MCU and the second Iron Man movie, I think it definitely stumbled over itself with the inclusion of too many plot threads that were each too complex to be told in one movie. This movie honestly made me appreciate Iron Man 3 more, which I think is a good thing because it shows that they learned from their mistakes. I still think that Phase 1 of the MCU is one of my favorites, but it still has its faults. Marvel was mature enough to continue on with their connected universe, now knowing which formula worked. The studio made some of their own errors, and that has affected them throughout the course of the MCU. Playing it safe, restricting creative freedom. I love what the MCU has done, but what made it great was the amount of time, effort, and creativity put into the projects. Iron Man 2 is an example of what you get when you limit those key elements. Marvel has been burned when they try something new, so now they mainly stick with a formula. There are outliers, however, that show Marvel can still choose good creators and artists who have a vision for what they want. I understand having a structure, but an elastic waistband always feels more comfortable.
my Chimberlin.
Children's is Batman.
Wait a minute. That's not Batman.
What are you talking about?
That's Batboy.